Well, I'd like to thank everybody for making their second trip back to Washington. For those who made it down here the first time, and thank you very much for rescheduling on a short notice so we could get this in before the comment period ends and before the TAC, the mandatory trading requirements go into effect this Saturday. So it was important we try to squeeze this one in, and I apologize for starting on a Monday, but the schedule is what the schedule is. So thank you very much for making all the arrangements. So today we have very interesting three sets of topics. We have data, we have the concept release on automated trading, and we have CEF issues, and we're going to focus primarily on the made available for trade determination that the Commission recently put out on several submissions. Now, of course, I was trying to hold up a little bit so I could talk about Acting Chairman Mark Weejan's efforts to be helpful on the data front. I'm going to go ahead and say it anyway, even though he's not here, and hopefully somebody will repeat it to him so I get credit for that. But he has been a tremendous force in terms of kind of refocusing the Commission's attention on data, and I appreciate his support and his willingness to set up this cross-divisional data group, and so we can begin to identify and correct any problems we have in our data, so we can be quite effective in our surveillance, risk management, and oversight responsibilities. I also appreciate the strong support for the comments made by Deputy Secretary of Treasury Mary Miller. In her last two public comments, she's addressed this issue head on, said she's going to roll up her sleeves and fix this issue, so I'm grateful for her support, and she's committed the resources of OFR, so that will be a great leverage tool for us and provide some additional assistance to attack this data challenge. So we have we continue to work on our cross-division, or our Office of Data and Technology SDR effort, and led by John Rogers, working with the 4 SDRs that we have permitted to make sure that they're quite effective in transferring the data to the Commission. But there's a lot of work that has to be done. We have the relevant division directors, as well as our economists and representatives from the Office of Surveillance and morning. And we'll hear from them as to their challenges and what's going right, what's going wrong with our data, and we'll see if we can help them out with fixing their problems. And certainly we'll want to learn more about their priorities as well. Panel 2, we've got a great discussion, something this committee has tackled, I think, from the very first meeting we had 3.5 years ago. And that's what are the appropriate risk management controls for automated trading. And so we will attack that again, and we will talk about it. As everyone knows, we have completed the comment period. Well, we just reopened it again until the end of this week. But for the concept release on the advanced testing and supervision of automated trading, we received dozens of very good comments, and we will have a handful of those people that commented talk about the proposal here today. And I am mindful of one of the questions that Larry Tabb actually posed to me. And one question that we'll be asking is, what is the problem that we're trying to fix with this? So I think that's a good question, and probably will be quite helpful in informing our discussion and our next draft proposal, if there is to be one. Panel 3, the CEF issue, made available for trade, has been a hot topic in a lot of publications, discussion around the Commission as well. DMO has certified several made available for trade submissions. The go live date is next week, or this weekend, I guess is the actual date. But this is an important topic that people are trying to understand, and we have linked these benchmark products with these package transactions, linked products, and there were a number of comments in the commenters that submitted comments that said we have some concerns about operational, technical, and jurisdictional challenges with these made available for trade submissions, and want to understand that. Now, I was a little frustrated when the first submission came out that it included package transactions, because it never addressed this issue in the comment memo to the Commission. And in fact, in that document, the staff recommendation to the Commission said, regarding package transactions, such requests are not appropriate for consideration within the scope of the Commission's process for reviewing a MAT determination. Well, if it's not then, when? So that is one of the reasons why we had some urgency in scheduling this meeting. Thankfully, the staff has also expressed an interest in reconsidering the package transaction and figuring out some of the technical and operational challenges with implementing package trades. And we're going to have a package trade roundtable on Wednesday. So that I'm looking forward to that. We'll obviously be able to discuss it extensively here and certainly on Wednesday. So maybe by the end of the week, we'll have a pretty clear picture of what these products are and how we should address them going forward in a temporary relief process. So those are the three panels we have today. Again, let me thank everyone for making adjustments to their schedule to be here following our snow day. Let me turn it over to the chairman for any comments he may have.
Thank you, Scott. Thanks for assembling the TAC group again today. As usual, a very good and interesting agenda for the day, and a number of topics that the agency could stand to benefit from this committee in talking through. A couple points I wanted to make with regard to data. We've had the SDR reporting obligation now in place for a little more than a year, and we've been getting some useful information through the reporting obligations, but there has been a sufficient passage of time now where it's become clear that we could probably do even better. And so Commissioner Malley's been very, very vocal about this, and I appreciate his commitment to making sure that we solve all of the regulatory challenges and problems we have that stem from our rules or otherwise, including this one. But it has become clear that we need to make sure that the quality of the data we are getting is as good as it should be, and as good as what was envisioned by our rulemakings and frankly by what Congress, I think, envisioned for this agency. So it was entirely appropriate, given the passage of time now since the beginning of the reporting obligation, that we take another look at this and see how we can improve upon what's already been provided to us through the reporting, the regulatory reporting from the marketplace. So we look forward to the work of this group we've assembled here internally. We look forward to the comment that we expect to get from market participants, including the folks in the room. And we'll continue that process, all in an effort again to make sure we maximize the utility of the information we get. One of the things that was most important to me is that we're not going to be able to enforce these new reforms as well as we would like unless we have high quality data that gives us the very best picture of what's happening in the marketplace. So we're looking forward to that process being complete. Secondly, on the made available to trade submissions and equally importantly, if not more importantly, the trading mandate on February 15th. This is obviously a critical moment for the marketplace, but also a critical moment for the agency. It's one of the last remaining deadlines, truly hallmark deadlines under Title VII. And as Commissioner Malley alluded to, we've been spending a lot of time in recent weeks, but even longer, sorting through some of the issues that have been brought to us and trying to figure out how we can do two things. First is to maximize the level of trading activity on the CEF platforms or on a DCM. That's priority number one, and that's what the rulemakings in Congress directed us to do. And then two, make the transition as orderly as we can. And there have been a number of key issues raised, including with respect to package transactions, that clearly present some challenges that we need to think through carefully, and all in an effort, again, to make sure that as many transactions as possible can take place on regulated platforms. but also to make sure that the February 15th date comes as relatively smoothly as possible. So looking forward to the discussion later on today and at this meeting on that subject. Also looking forward to the roundtable as well on Wednesday. And I think we've learned a lot already, but I expect we'll learn some more by the end of the day Wednesday. So with that, I'll turn it back over to Commissioner Malley. Thank you very much again for everyone being here.
All right, we're going to start with our first panel, which is made up of our division directors, our economist, Office of Surveillance, and Office of Data and Technology. We're just going to let them present on what's going right and what's going wrong with the data, and then we'll have a Q&A after that and walk through that in our first panel. So John Rogers, our head of Chief Information Officer in the Office of Data Technology. He'll be followed by Sai Srinivasan, our Chief Economist. Then Ananda Radhakrishnan, the Director of Division of Clearing and Risk, followed by Vince McGonigal, Division of Market Oversight. Dan Buxa will represent the Office of Surveillance, and Gary Barnett will clean up with the Office of Swap Dealer and Intermediary Oversight. So I will turn it over to you for 6 presentations. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Commissioner Amalia. Good morning, everyone. Thank you. Can you hear me? A little closer? Okay. All right. Good morning, everyone. Oh, that's better. Before I start, I will say that all statements and opinions are my own and do not necessarily represent the view of any commissioner or the commission. I'd like to start by talking about, see if I can advance this. I guess I'll use the keyboard. Yeah, first technology challenge using the remote here. So I'd like to start. I'm going to talk a little bit about 3 different subjects, specifically the harmonization effort that we have going on with the SDRs here at the Commission. A little bit about data that we collect under Part 20, and then lastly, an update on what we are doing with the Global Trade Repository Feasibility Study Working Group. The data that we deal with in harmonization is data housed at the SDRs, and it's something that I've been here and spoken on a couple of times. And here are the key elements that we're looking at as it relates to harmonization. Just as a refresher, we are focusing on standardization because obviously the ability to standardize on the data will improve the ability to aggregate and analyze the data. It'll improve the data quality. And an example of that would be the LEI, which we've been working on for some time. Another example would be UPI. Another key priority for harmonization is consistency, and that's consistency within the SDR itself, and then that's consistency across the SDR. So typically as we talk about the fields that we're looking at in our harmonization initiative, we're getting together and talking about what these fields mean and making sure that we all have a common understanding of that. Another aspect of what we're looking at is in terms of capability. Not only do the SDRs house data, but they also have portals that allow us to utilize that data. And so as we look at the portals, we look at each one of them and see things that we like in each and make recommendations as to how those portals can be improved. So we're trying to achieve the highest common denominator of standardization. The other considerations that we have, I already mentioned the impact of global standards, LEI and UPI. We're certainly looking at it from the perspective of how we might use the data within CFTC, so that's potential data uses. And we're very much aware of the impact on the people or the entities that are submitting data to us. And focusing on the relationship of the SDR's data, providing data to CFTC, and a bit less on the front end process, but it actually does bleed into the front end of how data is submitted to the SDRs, and I'll touch on that just a little bit. The other characteristic I would like to talk about as far as the SDR data is concerned, a lot of times people think about it as Part 45 data, but really it's much more than that. It's really Part 43 data, 45, 46, and 49, as well as optional data that will be flowing into the SDR. We're looking at all of that data. From the data that is flowing into the CFTC, we get what is called what we call Part 20 data, futures equivalent swaps positions for commodity data. We are receiving that on a nightly basis here at the Commission, performing validations on that data here and providing feedback to entities as to the quality of that data. That's a little bit different than the activities that are occurring on the SDR data, since the SDR is the entity that is holding the data, and so that validation is happening on that end. Excuse me. What we've done as far as a team is concerned is we have an interdivisional team made up of the representatives of the people to my right and left and their representatives. And we are meeting with all of the SDRs. We have meetings that happen with all the SDRs in the room with us to talk about harmonization, to talk about how we can develop consistency in the data across SDRs. But we're also talking to each SDR individually so that we can focus very specifically on the things that we see that relate to an SDR. So a little bit more detail when we're meeting with SDRs individually, and then raised up at a higher level to ensure consistency when we talk to the SDRs as a whole. We're focused on the content of the data, not necessarily the delivery method, because each SDR has a different method of receiving the data into the SDR, and we're really not talking about data coming back to CFTC at this point, but rather the data that's in the SDR. So it's really not, the subject is not XML versions, FPML versus FixML and that sort of thing, but rather more on, what do we see in the data and how meaningful that is to us, and how do we standardize across that. Our work has been focused on credit so far, although there has been a little bit of a move into other asset classes, actually taken up by the SDRs themselves. But as we move past credit, we'll be moving into the interest rate asset class second, and then on from that point. The SDRs are responsible for providing action plans for each phase and by asset class to basically record when they will deliver the capability that we've agreed upon through our harmonization activities. The outcomes that we are looking to get is to basically get each of the SDRs to provide data that allows us to compare across SDRs, even if it means creating additional data elements within the SDRs, so that we have that harmonized data element, because we're, as I said before, focused on data, a data view at the CFTC and not elsewhere. So some examples of checks that we would be doing in harmonization would be an LEI analysis, where we're looking at just how many well-formed LEIs there are in existence in the swaps data repository. Another would be a USI analysis, and how is the USI both traceable among transactions, but then how well is it persisting within the records that are submitted to the SDR. So we would present the results of that to the SDRs as we go through the harmonization effort. As it relates to Part 20, the validations are things that we've internally built, coded into our systems. We're constantly adding new validations into that data. We are rejecting data that is incomplete so that it can be resubmitted to us by the reporting party. And this is actually the first instance that we've had here at the Commission where in an automated fashion, we're examining data and pushing it back if there are problems with that, and we're maturing that process as we go along. An example of some validations we would do under Part 20 are to make sure that what is reported is only those commodities that are covered under Part 20. Another validation would be that the sum of the counterparty records notional values is not greater than the principal's record notional value. That should either should be roughly equivalent. So if it turns out that someone's reporting a total counterparty value that's greater, that's a problem. In the future, one of the things that we're going to be implementing is if it turns out the notional value that's reported doesn't match up with the strike price parameters for the futures equivalent commodity, then that would be something that we would reject. Sure.
I just tapped John on the elbow to interject just for a minute. With respect to the Part 20 obligations, in John's going into some detail about validation, but I think it's important because you're going to hear this from me a little bit later in the context of the working group, but to sort of step back and see how we've been thinking about this from a strategy perspective. And behind me, a few rows behind me, Greg Kusirk within the Division of Market Oversight has taken the lead for our team to think about what the implementation strategy around Part 20, let's say cleanup, is. How are we thinking on today, the current state, and then how do we get to the future state? So where John's talking about validation, controls, and ensuring that we have those entities who have reporting obligations, that they're complying with their reporting obligations, and to the extent that they are correcting errors that they've made, that we have a format in place where that error correction is either identified to us proactively, or we have the systems in place to sort of clean that data up as we receive it. And the goal then is to start to streamline where do we see repetitiveness with respect to data submission issues. How do we communicate that out to the community so that they can be corrected? And then also, frankly, how do we identify those entities that have a reporting obligation that are effectively not reporting as required under the rules, and are there, do we have gaps because we've given out maybe certain no action relief? Do we sort of have an understanding about our universe of Part 20 reporting obligations? And so while we're going through this data verification analysis, we are thinking, next steps for implementation, how this data is supposed to be utilized, how can we best streamline receipt of data that we feel has integrity, and then, as part of the process, what do we do next? Is there guidance? Previously, there were a guidebook that was made available for Part 20, and how do we evaluate on a going forward basis for those who aren't living through the process because we haven't contacted each and every trader or
First
submitter.
and last name followed by the spelling. Sure. Jessica. And the last name?
I'm just sort of interested to see where this goes. And so leaving off, I'll turn it back to John to finish the communication with who's ever on the phone. The idea then that for guidance on a going forward basis, so that we have a resource that's available not only internally but externally. So we're ensuring that those that have the obligation are complying with their obligation.
Thanks, Vince. So yes, a lot of what we do is, certainly from the Office of Data and Technology perspective, is in partnership with the divisions. DMO is a major partner as it relates to Part 20, and Vince. So I'll be a little bit shorter because Vince covered a couple of things that I was going to say. But thanks. So in talking about the progress that we've made, is overall I would say that the harmonization effort between the CFTC and the SDRs has been very valuable because we've been able to focus on the roughly 30 fields that are part of the first phase of the harmonization effort. It has certainly made the data more usable, I would say. We are focusing on multiple phases of delivery. We have been focused on phase 1, and SDRs have provided action plans, and I'm holding them up just for a visual aid, that basically lists all of the fields out and the dates that they will be delivering that information. And
John, is that public information?
That is not. So,
yeah.
Sorry. That's why I could hold it out at a distance and make sure no cameras were focused on it. But no, it's not. And we are also simultaneously working on phases 2, 3, and 4, with each one having about 30 fields. all in the credit asset class, and then we'll be shifting to the other asset classes. And the reason that it's 30 is to have chunkable things that we can focus on and deliver towards. And there's a long period of internal review by multiple offices within the commission before they get issued. So the phase two list should be issued in the relatively near future, followed by 3 and 4. I wanted to give you some examples of some of the improvements that have been made under the harmonization effort, and specifically these are from the SDRs in question. So, for example, and this actually bleeds into a little bit of what I was talking about, how the SDRs are not only focusing on the data being given to us, but also outreach to industry, even though we're focused on the relationship between us. For example, DDR has initiated a data quality review with industry to improve the overall submission quality and completeness across credit and FX asset classes. So even though we're focusing on credit, they're actually going a step further and focusing on that. And they've been reviewing the fields as part of the phase 1 list in that process, and have been conducting their own individual outreach to firms to review submissions so that the data can be harmonized up front and hopefully flow into the SDR in a more harmonized fashion. They've also begun the process of reviewing the rates asset class. And then from the portal perspective, they've implemented a series of enhancements to the portal search capability on behalf of the CFTC's use of the data. From an ICE Trade Vault perspective, they have actually implemented all of the fields that are in the phase 1 list. So there have been changes made to comply with the requests that we've made to improve the quality of that data. And they've been working with the ICE Trade Vault credit submitters to promote the use of LEIs, and have gotten that up to 90% rate of having valid LEIs. From a CME perspective, they've made improvements to their portal for reporting and access to data, and increased system controls to access the data. So those are some examples of improvements that have been made. From a Part 20 perspective, just to give you a little bit of a context on it, we have received since July of 2012 about 500 million transactions. And we have built 62 validations to apply to those transactions. And as Vince has pointed out, we are continuing to examine that data, and we'll be looking to issue additional guidance in the future to enhance that integrity. From a challenges perspective, I think that because we have lots of data and it is very complex, data consistency is still a challenge, because we have focused on 30 fields in one asset class, and we'll be focusing on a set of others, but there are other asset classes to deal with, and we're talking about hundreds of fields here, and lots of complexity in the data, because there are lots of data relationships that we have to deal with. So the SDRs, from their perspective, are increasing the number of validations that they're putting on their repositories. But there are other issues around, potentially identifying particular trade parties in the transactions that they have. These are coming from this is feedback coming from the SDRs themselves. And one of the things that we've heard as commentary is no action relief has created some challenges, because from the perspective, no action relief is fine on one end, but it really leads to additional validations and things that need to be put in place at a pretty quick time frame in order to get the data into the SDRs properly. And then lastly, one of the comments that was made was that the fact that there isn't a global UPI system, a product identification system, that has created challenges as well. From a CFTC perspective, some of the challenges that we see are the just understanding all of the different permutations of process flow of data as it flows, from the submitters into CEFs, into DCOs, and into SDRs ultimately. So having, continuing to develop that that map, if you will, of a process map is something that's a challenge. And then the data consistency, we would echo that. From a Part 20 perspective, I believe Vince pretty much covered that. So the last thing I wanted to mention was the Global Trade Repository Working Group. It's an international working group. It's sponsored at the FSB, CPSS, and IOSCO. They're the co-secretariats on this initiative. CFTC representing IOSCO and the European Central Bank representing CPSS are co-chairs. Myself, along with Benoit Couret from the European Central Bank, are co-chairs. From CFTC, our vice chair is Srini Bangar-Balay, who is our chief data officer here at CFTC. There are about 25 countries that are represented on this initiative, and the focus is on, if we think about harmonization from a CFTC perspective, for repositories that are collecting data and trying to get consistency along those lines, this concept is a global aggregation capability where repositories from around the world are potentially providing access so that from a global perspective, financial risk can be assessed and stability can be assured. So it's on, and it has definitely very interesting parallels to what we're doing here. Some of the things that are being focused on as part of this initiative is to think about the potential constructs for a global repository. One would be a central database, a big Uber database that would hold the data, a logically separated database, or just having regulators deal with other regulators when they need data. So there are other issues from a business, legal, and technological perspective that are being focused on as part of this initiative. The website is up on the slides if you want to look at the report that's come out. It actually came out in February, and comments are due at the end of February, and the final report is due at the end of May. So with that, I am done. I'd be happy to answer questions at the appropriate time, but right now I will turn it over to Saeed.
Thank you. So the task is to sort of talk about what's working and what's not working. And so I thought sort of John was talking about things at a certain level of abstraction, and I'm sort of going to get into something much more granular, and which is the CFTC swaps report, the weekly swaps report. So sort of have a question here to the audience and the panelists. How many of you sort of can raise your hand? How many of you have actually seen any of our weekly swaps report? Okay, so I think this is a good opportunity to sort of educate people about what the weekly swaps report is all about, and we can also talk about the challenges we face in putting the report together and how market participants can actually use the report. So you access it from the main page here. You go to market reports, and there is.
Yeah, please move away from that page very quickly.
So this report comes out every week. It's a weekly report, and it comes out around. Our team releases it around 3 p.m. on Eastern on Wednesday. So by 3:34, it's up for the whole world to sort of see it. There's an option for you to sort of make a subscribe to the report. So when the report is released for public consumption, you can actually go and see it. There's this section at the top every week which talks about special announcement, and it's a space for the staff to highlight any sort of issues that we see in the data. And so I'm just going to walk through the latest report. It has the swaps report talks about open positions, and also gives you information about transaction data. So, and there is sort of a lag. There is a a 12-day lag in sort of in the data that's presented in the report. So I'll just sort of go through some of the tables and sort of encourage people to sort of go in and take a look at it at your own leisure. So if you sort of, what this table gives you is gross notional outstanding. And we are talking about positions, this is sort of the open interest equivalent from the futures world and single count. And as you can see, at any given time, we give you data for the, so this came out last Wednesday. It gives you open positions as of Jan 24th and also for the prior 4 weeks. And so this is sort of the headline number. So you can say that total interest rate open positions in interest rate swaps is about $330 trillion. Cleared is 194 and uncleared is 136. And it's sort of interesting to see on a week-to-week basis the numbers jump around. We have questions about why this happens, and at times we have explanations for why it jumps around, and there are times we don't have explanations for why things and the numbers jump around. We don't massage the data. Whatever data we get from the depositories, we just sort of aggregate them and push them out. We also break up the interest rate swaps in a category of interest rate swaps called the cross-currency swaps. We have a line item for that. Those are not subject to mandatory clearing, so none of it is cleared. The other number which we aggregate is the total credit default swap data. And we also give information for FX, equity, and other commodities, but a warning, those are estimates. It's where we are today, it's sort of, we are not in a position where we can actually work with the data. The staff has spent over a year working with the various SDRs to clean up the data for interest rate swaps and for credit default swaps for us to even calculate the notional amounts. When you go beyond IRS and CDS, say in FX and equity and commodities, there are a lot of there are a lot of options transactions which happen and options positions. The data is not clean. So if somebody does, say, a longer dated crude oil options contract, it's a swap, but they'll just say that I have a position for 50,000 barrels of crude, and here is a strike price, and here's the expiration. It's difficult for us to figure out what's the notional amount of the trade. So we are sort of working with the SDRs to sort of figure out how to compute the notional amounts for it, but we're not there yet. But the plan is, we have a decent handle on the data for rates and CDS, and progressively we'll be sort of we started working on the commodity, equity, and FX, and as time goes by, we will be able to actually report the actual notional amounts of open positions for the other asset classes.
Say, do you have a timetable on when you're going to be able to be more precise on the next three?
I wish I had, but really it's very, very difficult. As I said, there are very few standards here. We have weekly meetings from our office and also from staff from DMO. We are looking at, say, commodity options, commodity swaps. And the data is all over the place. Even we've been looking at certain slices of the equity swaps. For instance, we looked at variance swaps, and there is no consistency in the industry in terms of how they report the values. So not making any commitments, but as I said, we spent over a year working on IRS and CDS, and in those two markets, from what we understand, there was already a lot of standardization within the industry, so we could leverage off it. But for the other asset classes, from what we understand, there isn't enough standardization within the industry. So we can just sort of work off what work has been done by the market participants. But from so that's essentially, we have dependency on the market participants and them coming up with some standardization. But right now, our main point of contact on these things is the SDRs. So we talk to the SDRs, and the SDRs in turn work with market participants.
Can you briefly summarize the process in which you receive this data? Do you go into the SDR and just pull it, or do they prepare it? What is the process that leads up to this briefly?
So we spent some time. We initially used to download all the raw data from the SDRs, and then we worked with the SDRs, and they actually collate the data for us in at some level of aggregation, and we download it from them. We go to the websites and we download the data. So there are 3 different SDRs now, and we sort of download from each one of them. And then we have standard code that we are using to process the data. And there are a number of checks in it. We do some data validation. And if we have issues with it, we sort of, if we need to go back to the SDR, typically it'll be something where somebody does, say, a 10 million $10 million US Korean won swap, but the market participant would have reported it as a large, the Korean won denomination would have been in the US dollar field. So we find issues like that. There are times when the SDRs will find issues which they'll sort of flag to us, and so we sort of work both ways. So the SDRs do some massage, they collate the data, they generate reports for us, we download it, and then it's a process of collating the data, cleaning it up, and putting it out. Where we are, it takes us, there have been some reports in the press that it takes 2 staffers a full week plus to sort of do this report. We've been working with ODT to automate the process as much as we can. As I said, we have 2 staffers working full time on it, and the plan clearly is to sort of automate it as much as possible. So this is sort of, you get the gross notional, and then I'll sort of talk about the transaction volume, which is sort of also very interesting. For transaction volume, we give both the number of trades, the trade count, as well as the notional amount that's traded on a weekly basis. So this is the number of trades that happen, and this is the breakup is similar to what you saw earlier for notional. So you see that there were about 21,000 transactions that happened for interest rate swaps, and about 14,000 plus of them were cleared. And similarly, we do the calculations for total currency IRS and for total credit. We also give information by participant type. And participant type, essentially, we break it up between SDs, MSPs, and others. And as you can see, say for interest rate swaps on Jan 24th, most of the volume was by SDs, MSPs, and others. Nope, I don't want to give any feedback now. The swaps by asset class is also available. So once again, we give only for interest rates and credit default swaps. I'll sort of take a moment here. There's a challenge we face when we work with through the data in terms of the taxonomy that's in place for identifying different swaps. From what I understand, there is this ISDA taxonomy that market participants are using when they report the trades, and which the SDRs also follow. But it's not granular enough. There's sort of the truncation of the description at some point in time, at some level, I guess. So what we have seen and what we're comfortable with is aggregating data in terms of basis swaps, caps, flows, debt options, exotics, fixed float, FRAs, inflation swaps, OIS, and swaptions. One of the things that we have to be sort of careful when we put this together is that we have to comply with the Section 8 requirements in the Commodity Exchange Act, which basically says that, I'm sort of paraphrasing it here, that we can't be sort of revealing the trading strategies of any market participant. So we have tried to sort of get more granular at points in time, but if we think that we're running the risk of, if there's just one trade that has happened on a consistent basis on a particular asset class, we run the risk of letting the market know that here's this person who is sort of identifying an individual potentially or an individual firm who's doing the trades. So we put it under the other category. We also show by product and currencies. So once again, you can see most of the activity tends to be in US dollar and in euros. And this information is it's sort of useful for multiple purposes. There was a call a couple of weeks ago on OIS and how the OIS could be sort of a good benchmark going forward for the LIBOR, for instance. So the question came up is, do you see enough transactions in the OIS? So I just had to sort of go onto our website and say, this is the transaction that we see, transaction count that we see in the data. So if we see that under USD, you just have 73 trades a week, is that good enough? Is the market liquid enough as a benchmark? We also show volume by tenor and by product. And once again, as you can see, I'm just focusing on OIS here. Most of the activity is sort of is in the shorter tenor. I'll show the data for credit default swaps. Once again, you have for index, Europe, North America, Asia, and others. There is a lot more that we can show in terms of the index and sort of get more granular into the data, but we are at a point wherein the data is not clean enough for us to sort of get more granular. But once again, we're working with the SDRs, and as time goes by, we'll be sort of able to show more details. We also show data by grade, by market participants, and we haven't been able to show data by tenor here, because I think most of the activity is in the 5 and 10 year. And I'll just sort of summarize, wrap this up quickly by showing the couple of tables we have for the notional volume that is traded. And this is the transaction dollar volume aggregated by the different asset classes. And once again, you can see most of the rates volume is getting cleared. And also in terms of credit default swaps, most of it is being cleared. So if anybody at any point wants to sort of figure out how much of it is getting cleared, you just go to our website and do it. I don't think this is data which only we have access to. And I don't think market participants have access to sort of the data at this level of granularity. So I think we sort of encourage folks to sort of use it and have more informed discussion about what's actually happening in the marketplace. And swaps by asset class. Once again, I showed you the trade count, and you can also see data by product and cleared status in terms of notional volumes.
So,
yep.
Can you break out package trades out of this data?
Good question. There's a challenge involved in package trades, and when a package trade, we understand there is a lot of transactions which happen, which are package trades essentially, where you sort of let me take an example. If somebody does a butterfly in terms of a crude oil option trade or a butterfly trade, it has 4 legs to it, and when you negotiate the trade, it's negotiated at a particular price. And then when it gets reported to the SDRs, from what we understand, the dealers break it up into the individual legs and report the legs to the SDRs. And there's no field in the data that's sent to the SDR highlighting the fact that these component legs were part of a single strategy. So once again, we are sort of working with market participants and SDRs to sort of come up with solutions to identify this issue. We have the same issue in the DCM world also. There is a large fraction of trades in, say, the Eurodollar futures and also the options and marketplace, which are strategies where people are negotiating these things as trades as a package. But when it gets sent for clearing, they break it up into the individual legs. In the DCM world, there is at least a flag in the data we get which said that this trade was part of a spread trade. And they might even identify that this was what type of spread it was. But it's impossible for us to say that these 3 line items were part of a single strategy. So we have that issue in the DCM world, and we're not even close to that level of granularity in the SDR world. So.
Thank you. Do you have anything else?
No, this is from you.
Thank you very much.
I just want to chime in real quickly. Say thanks for that presentation. I think it illustrates something I alluded to at the outset, which is that there's already quite a bit of good that's come from the reporting requirements under our rules, and I think what Saeed just went through illustrates that pretty well. I think what we're here to discuss and through some of these other processes we've begun at the agency, we're trying to figure out how we can improve upon what we're already able to produce and information we're already receiving. So I think Saeed's presentation did a nice job of illustrating that. Thanks.
Morning. My name is Ananda Radhakrishnan. I'm Director of the Division of Clearing and Risk. And I very much appreciate Scott inviting us to give these presentations, because this may be the first time that we are publicly highlighting some of the issues the divisions face in getting the data, aggregating it, and trying to figure out whether people are actually doing what they're supposed to be doing. If you step back and think about it, the reason why you have reporting is because statute requires it, our rules require it. It provides information to the Commission so that we can discharge our responsibilities. And in some instances, it provides information to members of the public. So let me talk to you about the specific requirements that DCR, or the priorities that DCR has and will have, what we're trying to find out, and what problems we are encountering. So first, we need to ensure compliance with the Commission's clearing requirement. As you know, the Commission issued a clearing requirement at the end of 2012 with respect to interest rate swaps and credit default swaps. And so our challenge is to find out whether people who are required to clear are in fact clearing. Now, there is a fundamental challenge that the statute poses us, and it is as follows. There are people who are required to clear, entities who are required to clear, who do not register with us. So how do you find out? Right? So that's a big issue. So I'm not talking about that issue, but that's an issue that needs to be highlighted. In other words, let's say you take a financial entity who's not required to register with us. They have to clear. We have no way of knowing whether they're in fact clearing or not, because we don't have a process for self-identification. That may be something that we take care of in the future. The second thing we need to do is to ensure compliance with the exceptions and exemptions to the clearing requirement. The third thing we need to do is to review the swap market on an aggregate product-by-product basis with respect to other potential clearing requirements that the staff may recommend to the Commission for the Commission's consideration. With respect to what we want to do in the future, we want to ensure with compliance with other clearing-related rules, for example, straight-through processing. We want to review compliance with the uncleared margin requirements. There was a proposal out there which we have not finalized, but there was an international effort to come up with broad principles on how we should deal with uncleared margin requirements, and I suspect that before too long the Commission will propose and finalize requirements for that. And then we need to do risk-based analysis of clearing members and customers' positions across both the uncleared and the cleared swaps market. So I mentioned to you the clearing requirement. All swaps that are subject to the requirement must be submitted to a registered DCO unless there's an exception, exemption, or other relief from required clearing is properly elected. The reporting of cleared swaps is, in our words, these are my words, the division's words, complicated by the fact that you have so-called alpha swaps, the original swap being reported to one SDR, and the beta and gamma swaps, which are the positions that result from clearing reported to another SDR. And we'll talk about that in the next slide. And what we see is that the so-called alpha swap, the original swap, remains open in SDR data. They appear to be bilateral, but they're subject to the clearing requirement. So those two things can't happen at the same time. And the data in the SDR must be current and accurate. We have a regulation that requires that to take place. Here's our working assumptions. So let's assume that if you look on the left-hand side, you have two parties who do a bilateral transaction. That's the alpha swap you reported to, in this case, SDR1. It also happens to be a swap that has to be cleared. Both parties are required to clear it. So they send it to clearing, to one DCO. We have a rule that requires the DCO to have rules when they get a swap for clearing to extinguish the original swap and replace it with two equal but opposite swaps between the clearing member and the clearinghouse. And so this is what we call the beta and gamma swaps. And those are reported, and I guess they're reported to a different SDR. So the USI of the alpha swap may not be associated with the beta and the gamma swap. The alpha swap may not be terminated. So the results that swaps that appear to be subject to the clearing requirement are appearing in one SDR as bilateral and uncleared open swaps when in fact they've been accepted for clearing by a DCO and in fact have been cleared. This is not rocket science, ladies and gentlemen. I don't see why a swap, which was executed bilaterally, cannot be mapped to the DCO with a USI so that we know that a particular swap that was executed bilaterally has in fact been cleared. It's a mapping exercise. It shouldn't be that difficult. Now, maybe the issues are, and I'd be interested to know what members of the committee think, maybe the issues are that our rules are not very clear. Our rules don't say you must do this, you must do this, you must do that. Because it is very unfortunate. My team and I, let me introduce you to Brian O'Keefe. Brian O'Keefe, can you stand up? Brian O'Keefe is the Deputy Director for Products. He may be calling some of you and asking you for information because we thought we could get this information from the SDR. We were wrong. So we had to call market participants who we knew had to clear to find out this information. We shouldn't have to do that, right? Because otherwise, in my view, the reporting requirement is not doing the job that it's supposed to be doing, right? After all, it's supposed to provide the commission with information, and the fact that we cannot find information in one source is a source of deep concern to us. So that's why, I applaud the fact that we have this division-wide working group looking at this issue. And I'm sure there are other issues. John has highlighted it, Sai has highlighted it. There are a lot of other issues that we are facing. But this one seems to be a no-brainer, but in fact, it is very difficult for us. Now, entities have responded. I'm going to skip the first two. Entities have responded when we ask, why is this so difficult? Why is it so difficult for us to find whether a particular swap has in fact been cleared? And the response has been, well, they've actually been cleared, but you don't know it, or they were canceled, or there were errors. And so, again, if some of these things have taken place, we should know about it. We should know, maybe I'm being unreasonable. At a press of a button, I should know exactly all the information that we need. Right. Well, the Commission should know exactly all the information that we need, but we don't have that. So some entities have also highlighted issues with respect to how Part 45 addresses cleared swaps. and the lack of clarity around responsibilities with regard to the termination of the so-called alpha swap. So it could be an issue with our rules, and if there are issues with our rules, then hopefully staff can propose solutions for the Commission so that we can change our rules so that it doesn't become that difficult to get the information it is that we want. So we believe that improving data quality it's important, but we need a more practical solution. And again, I talked about the mapping or matching of information that we use. We have attempted to use an automated process using an SAS program developed by colleagues in ODT to try and get the information that we want. And we're actively working with our colleagues in the data office so that we can get the information that we want. The other priority is the Commission and our staff have issued exemptions and exceptions, and people need to elect these exemptions and exceptions, and they need to report them to an SDR. So one is the end user exception, the other is the inter-affiliate exemption, the cooperative exemption, and then the Treasury affiliate no action relief that's stamp granted. And SDRs are required to monitor, screen, and analyze end user exception claims by individuals and affiliated entities. So the division is working with the SDRs so that we can get the reports to make sure that people are, first of all, people who are not clearing up and entitled to elect one of these exemptions or exceptions are in fact doing so. The third priority is aggregating swap data so that we can decide whether new categories of swaps should be cleared, and this will help us in developing our proposals to the Commission for their consideration. And in reviewing submissions by DCOs, we have looked to Part 43 and Part 45 and other data in order to review the size and scope of a given product's market. And by working with my colleague Sai and his office, we've been able to, and SDRs and DCOs, we've been able to get a general sense of a product's notional and a number of transactions from SDR data, but as Sai pointed out, it is not a happy place. So we need to get to that happy place so that we can in fact make a recommendation to the Commission that's based on facts. Because I'm sure you'll all agree it would be not a good scenario for us, A, not to be able to do our jobs, or B, to try and do something which is not based on all the facts that are out there. So, and we think that the data that we should be using going forward is not BIS data, with all due respect to the BIS, but it should be data that's sent to the SDR, because otherwise why have SDRs in the first place? So going forward, we will participate in all data-related cross-divisional efforts, including the Commission-wide prioritization of data-related matters, and we will continue to build working relationships with SDRs, CEFs, contract markets, and DCOs, and reporting counterparties to resolve issues that we see. And I'll be happy to take any questions in due course. Thank you.
Thank you, Ananda. For anybody that might be on the phone or anybody interested in these presentations, they are all on the Technology Advisory Committee website within the CFTC.gov website. So all the presentations we'll see today are already up there. Next we have
we're going to switch. Right, Dan.
Dan Buxa, Division Office of Surveillance within DMO.
Good morning. As the Commissioner said, my name is Dan Buxa. I'm an associate director in the Division of Market Oversight, focusing on surveillance, and I'm in charge of the teams that look after interest rate, credit, equity, and FX swaps. So I've been invited to participate and give everyone my thoughts on the swaps data. And again, they're just my thoughts. They're not the statements of the Commission or any particular commissioner. Before we get started, just a step back to give everybody some context on what we mean when we're talking about swaps data. Not everyone might be ardent followers of the TAC or directly related to swap data, so give you a frame of reference of what we're actually discussing. That the data set, to put it mildly, is massive. It's enormous and it's incredibly complex. It's comprised of data from hundreds of different data submitters, almost 20 CEFs, over 100 provisionally registered swap dealers, and it's constantly changing. As you can imagine, swaps are entering and leaving the database, terms are being harmonized and adjusted, and there are countless upon countless rows and columns of rich swap data content. Now, if we were asked to do this a year ago, my presentation would be pretty blank. At that point, we had yet to start looking at swaps. We had very little understanding of the data, and we were in a much worse place than we are today. We've spent a lot of time and committed a lot of resources within our division working with ODT, with the SDRs, and also look forward to working as part of this interdivisional working group on data to get us to the current place. Now, if we were to talk about swap data status from DMO's viewpoint, there are 5 main tenets that we would hit on. First, I'd echo what John and the others said about the importance of harmonization. It's really important for the harmonization of the deliverable of the data and also the standardization of the actual data in the cells and the inputs themselves. Every division that's up here has different problems. The problems are no better, no worse, not more important or less important than others. From the surveillance view, our problems are different. We don't look at data from a high level or in summary terms or in aggregates. We have to find bad actors, bad actions, potential manipulation, disruption in the market. So we're looking at things at a very granular and discrete basis. Now, without harmonized data or standardized terms, you can imagine how much harder it is to do this across this massive data set and how hard it is to become efficient or build economies of scale with the limited staff and resources at our disposal. We're also faced with validation and reporting errors. Now, by validation, it's limited and there's some constraints that are placed upon it. And by reporting errors, I mean over-reporting, under-reporting, duplicate reporting, delayed reporting. So if you think about it, if you're being tasked with looking at this massive set of data and trying to understand these complex markets, and the data that you're looking at isn't completely validated, or there are various unknown errors or bugs with it, it makes your job even harder to really understand what's happening, to answer any questions, to provide any feedback, or do any analysis. We also have various data reporting interruptions that we've faced the last year. And by reporting interruptions, I mean the data just isn't there. Some subset of it isn't reported, or it's not available for a various slew of reasons. And from the surveillance view, we don't stop. We can't wait for the data to get better. The market doesn't stop trading. Prices don't start moving. Bad actions don't cease just for our benefit. So it's really hard for us to do the work, obviously, if we don't have the data in front of us or we can't get to it. Another limitation is the lack of a transaction and position database, a single transaction and a single position database. Now, I don't bring this up to allude or to say that we should be at this point, at this juncture after looking at swaps data for a year. It's just a frame of reference for what we do with futures. There's one place where we get all futures transactions and we can look at it, and there's one place where we can look at all futures positions and we can analyze it. Now, that being said, that's after tens of years of receiving futures data and working on improving the process, ingesting it, understanding, and synthesizing it. So not where we are at the moment, but it's where we'd like to be. The final issue that confronts surveillance when we're looking at swaps are exotics or bespokes. Obviously, these transactions are complex, structured, tailored, you name it, and they have various characteristics such as different cash flow waterfalls, different reference benchmarks, different underlyings, you name it. When you think about this large data set I'm speaking of, and you think about what everybody said about data and the quality of it, and then you throw in some sliver of exotics that have even less terms that are electronically reportable, that are even harder to understand from a conceptual basis or a risk basis or a market action perspective, it makes it that much harder to really understand what you're looking at when you can't use the same data set and you have to look at a PDF, let's say, or some confirm that was sent to somebody through some other means. Now, that being said, DMO still has to do the work today. And mostly from the surveillance hat that I'm wearing, but also from other parts of the division and the system safeguards team, there are 6 main things that I'd say we're doing at the moment. The first is we're hitting the data as often as we possibly can at the SDRs. Accessibility was a really important goal of the Commission the last year, and being able to directly get to the data, review it, and access it. And we can do that now. There are several functional SDR portals. So we could analyze market events by looking at swaps data in addition to just futures data. We can now pursue potential manipulation theories based on this additional information and do more than we could a year ago due to this added transparency. Now, our ability to query the data means that we can build some automated reports. For the data that we can see and for the data that's of high quality, we can have staff build some code, model some tools, and create some engines that make it more efficient and timely for us to do our job. And that job, from the surveillance view again, is to ensure that there's compliance with Commission rules. One of our main tasks is to serve as a referral engine to the Division of Enforcement. So when you think of swaps data rules, we want to make sure that people are compliant with what's on the books. And we do that very simply by looking for anomalies. Anomalies can be lots of different things. We think of it in the most rudimentary of terms. Does this data point make sense? When we're looking at the transaction record, is it looking for a date, but instead we have a currency? Is it looking for a size, but instead we have a benchmark? Is it a term that you would definitely fill out on a paper ticket back in the day when you're negotiating a swap trade and it's missing? Is it a term that is in the regulations that needs to be there and it's not? Is it a data point that's actually filled out, but it's completely incomprehensible through some code or whatever you have it? You just don't understand what's in the field. If we reach that point, we invoke our special call process, where we reach out to the data submitter or the SDR, and we just say, explain. Give us a narrative of what's happening here. Tell us what we're looking at. We don't make any assumptions. We don't have that luxury. We can't give people the benefit of the doubt and say why the data might be missing. We don't know why the data looks a certain way or why it's gotten onto our desks in that format. So we leave it up to the reporting counterparty to explain what's going on. And based on the response and what we think of the narrative, it becomes a referral to the Division of Enforcement for investigation. All this work around the Commission rules has led us to realize that we really need to do a lot of internal analysis and coordination. We've done this throughout the year with ODT and with the other divisions, and like I said earlier, we're going to be doing a lot more of it with this interdivisional working group on data. And what it's really allowed us to do is increase our understanding of the data throughout this year. What does this data set contain? And what are the definitions of the fields? Not just what does the field define as, but what is the purpose of the data point within the field? You need to understand what this massive and complex data set is actually telling you. Not just that the field is filled out correctly and it's in the right format and it's got the right information, but if you put it all together with the rest of the fields in the transaction, what is that participant doing? If you put it together with all of their positions, what might they be trying to influence in the market? Now, what we've also realized is that through this internal work, we really have to focus on data quality. And when we spot these irregularities by hunting around the data or peeling back different layers of the onion, we let people know. We notify ODT, the pertinent SDR, or the data submitter to get these things fixed. And we have gotten better data over time. That being said, there's no silver bullet. It's not a panacea. It's not a one-stop shop. There's no guarantee that if you fix a field once for one data submitter on one SDR, that'll never happen again with the same participants, or it'll never happen with other participants in the same SDR, or it'll never happen with other SDRs. And again, to continue the theme of a really large data set, you fix one data point, how does the next one look? How does the one after that look? How do they fit together? It's an incredibly iterative process that will take a considerable amount of time and resources to get the data right. We feel like we can get there, but it's not going to be a short-term solution. And finally, one of the things we're doing is looking at Commission Regulation 4924 in particular. I don't want to prioritize or emphasize one rule versus another, but we do want people to promptly report the system disruptions and planned system changes within their SDR to DMO. It's much better to be proactive and for you to tell us what's happening than for us to see something wrong and to check in with you to see what's happening. We have noticed that the SDRs have gotten better about this recently, and we really hope that this continues in the future. And then finally, DMO has other data interests in addition to swaps. We don't just look at swaps. We look at futures as well, obviously, and we have to look at the market as a whole. So we were hoping to bring up these three topics to get some feedback and advice from the TAC on how to challenge them going forward in the future. The first is ownership and control reports. These are near and dear to our heart because they'll help us further understand futures markets. We'll be able to link a trader's transactions in futures to their futures positions. We'll understand how a position was built and by who, and what were the steps that happened in between to get to the final point. We also care about messaging data as well. Right now, the only data that flows in are the consummated or executed trades in futures. Now, this is obviously very useful and high value information, but there are certain times where we would want to know messaging data. And the additional visibility into the market behavior and the signals that people might be sending via their messages and how that influences price, supply and demand, you name it. And finally, we're interested in visibility into other discrete data sets. This could be underlying prices of settling instruments, participants in those other markets, or benefiting positions across other markets. Again, I'm only speaking from the surveillance side of the world. So we care about what people might be doing to impact our markets that violate our rules. So clearly there are some jurisdictional swaps and there are some non-jurisdictional swaps. There are cash markets that are non-jurisdictional. However, everything is related to a certain degree, whether it be some correlation, high or low, to price, or directly related, such as impacting the pricing or the settlement of a swap. For us to be able to say we're doing oversight on these markets and we understand somebody's behavior, we'd like to know at certain times, if not continuously, what is happening in those other markets and how our participants are behaving in those other markets. In conclusion, it's to continue what I said earlier, the data's better. It's not where we'd like it to be. We're further along than we thought we would be, and we're going to keep working together with other divisions and the SDRs to improve it going forward. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Dan. I think that, I would say from the presentations that you've heard so far this morning, at least from my perspective, I get the sense, and I know that there's an appreciation within the divisions of the challenges that we face. And so, when I started with the Division of Market Oversight just a few months ago, one constant theme of conversation that I've had within the division, and people coming up to me, has been focused on the data and how can we get the data to a state that we can effectively evaluate and do our jobs, frankly. And so when the Commission announced most recently this interdivisional working group, I see it as an opportunity to leverage the resources and, in some instances, the conversations that have been going on, frankly, for quite some time, since these rules were initially thought about and put out for review and comment, and now on the implementation stage. So we have an interdivisional working group that involves each of the operating divisions from within the Commission. We have members from the Division of Market Oversight, and I've put as many staff as I can get my hands on this group, because we want to be effective, and we see also from the other divisions sort of a state of volunteerism. The Office of General Counsel, the Division of Enforcement, DSIO, the ODT, and our Office of Chief Economists have all come together in the past few weeks to have substantive conversations, to sort of think about the priorities that they've seen over the course of time within their units, but also as they communicate with each other. And so in looking at where we are going, I think in the first instance, we have a lot of information just internally to think about and to help us prioritize, and I think that's a good place to be. The working group was charged with its the primary oversight responsibility for the working group is to evaluate compliance with Part 45 reporting rules, related provisions, and consistency in the regulatory reporting by market participants. And so that's broken down into 4 subcategories or prioritizations: review of industry compliance, data field standardization, guidance and regulatory improvements, and technology improvements. So they're taking each in turn. Industry compliance. My expectation is that market participants are aware of their reporting obligations and are diligently executing their responsibilities to timely and accurately report, period. My expectation, I'll say it again, is that market participants are aware of their reporting obligations and are diligently executing their responsibilities to timely and accurately report. The divisions are charged with identifying those major compliance failures and will recommend next steps. So where the regulations are clear, the obligation to report is clear. If there are areas where there can be more clarity, the divisions are taking on the responsibility to identify and provide guidance and recommend rule changes as appropriate. But a number of the issues that you've heard this morning, validation errors, failures to report, inaccurate reporting, don't necessarily or don't at all relate to whether the rules should be fixed. They relate to entities and individuals who have a responsibility to accurately capture the information that's before them and provide that information forward. Data field standardization. We've heard from John Rogers in particular about harmonization efforts. The interdivisional working group team will be looking to prioritize those harmonization comments so that we can put forward some high level, what are the areas that we feel will have the most significant impact with respect to data standardization. This conversation, of course, doesn't happen without the registered entities, the swap data repositories. Their role and their obligation here is clear. Our expectation is that the swap data repositories will continue the hard work that they've been doing to effectively communicate with the division and market participants so they can efficiently and effectively comply with their obligations. And I look forward to continuing to work with the swap data repositories as part of this working group's efforts. We are interested in identifying any data reporting gaps for execution of our surveillance and oversight responsibilities. And Dan gave an excellent presentation concerning how our Division of Market Oversight appreciates and evaluates its surveillance challenges and the steps that we have undertaken and plan to take in the future. Finally, and I talked about this, the structure isn't any different than the example we used this morning with respect to Part 20 guidance. We evaluate where the issues are. We look to see how reporting obligations by entities and individuals can be enhanced, where the information needs to be clarified, and then our expectation is to get back out to industry with those clarifications so that we're able, all of us, to get information that's readily usable by the Commission and by market participants. The working group is in the process of compiling questions which we'll put out for comment. In formulating this working group, I took on the responsibility to report back to the Commission by spring on recommendations for next steps as it relates to Part 45. The members of this committee, outside of the working group now, I'm talking about the TAC, can be instrumental in informing our opinions and recommendations. So I request that you please take the comment period seriously, be diligent about the information that you provide. As I've seen in my short time within DMO, all of the information that comes in is seriously considered and certainly is helpful to us in making recommendations. In evaluating some of the areas that we've received feedback already within the working group, we have a bullet list of a couple of dozen topics that the group is considering. And I'm not going to go into specifics in terms of identifying, because that'll be part of the question period when we go out probably. Well, we have a due date in mid-March, so within the next couple of weeks, but by no later than mid-March. But the idea, at least in a conceptual focus, is looking at reporting of cleared swaps, continuation data. Are there transaction types and workflows that might require further discussion? A review, of course, of Part 45, including all appendix and tables attached thereto. What are the other SDR and counterparty obligations? Where is CFTC with respect to implementation? And where do we see noncompliance? And internally, of course, where should there be referrals? Going forward within the Division of Market Oversight, we're also looking organizationally to restructure our program so that we have an appropriate emphasis for swaps data and reporting obligations within the division. And I hope in the next coming weeks that we'll be able to formally announce steps that we've taken organizationally to address this very important topic within the Commission. Gary.
Hey, Vince, can I ask you a question?
Sure. Gary was too slow getting over to his chair.
Sorry.
Intentionally.
So when you chimed in with John Rogers about Part 20, you had a very pro-conformance. We want to make sure that everybody understands the rules. How do we help you understand? We want to get compliance higher. This presentation, you came off and said, you know, we're going to make referrals. Everybody knows what the rules are. How does that reconcile? Is it only Part 20 the problem where you're going to be lenient, or are you going to have a very strong, you know, enforcement bent to this rule compliance?
Right. So coming from enforcement, people are like, well, he's going to have an enforcement bent. My expectation always is that the time and effort that's gone into the rules, the expectation is that those rules are clear. And so if you have an obligation or failure to meet an obligation within the Division of Enforcement and anywhere, frankly, you first evaluate how clear was the obligation, where was the understanding of the reporting party or the entity that you're looking at, and then you make a determination whether that violation is something that sort of warrants further review, maybe by the Division of Enforcement, or warrants an action. So taking that sort of vantage and looking at obligations within the DMO, I don't see it as a Part 20. I use Part 20 as an example because, frankly, the discussions that I've had with the team are much more concrete to me, and just my evaluation, where it is clear that, you know, there are issues where parties are not reporting, for example, but there are also questions about how they report. And so if there is a reporting error, and are they over-reporting because they want to be a good citizen, sort of how do we evaluate sort of that over-reporting? That might not sound like an enforcement referral. Someone has over-reported. But if someone has not reported, that could be an area that we'd get into. So I take that experience and then look to these other areas. Is it Part 45? Why is it that if there is a particular reporting field that's required to be, information is required to be input, why is that blank? And then why is that information being sent along to the commission, which then requires us to go back and sort of do some validation? Who has the earliest opportunity to ensure that the information is being accurately reported? And then what steps do we have along the way to capture that information? So I'll start with referrals, or we'll think about referrals always in the first instance, where we see the violation as being very clear. As you move away from clarity, you get to questions about, is guidance appropriate? Are additional rules, should they be contemplated? So that's my thinking. I don't see sort of one-stop process for any type of evaluation. But if we do see that there is an obligation to report and people aren't doing it, I do want to get away from the hand-holding that I think in some instances has occurred for a period of time during the transition. We want to step back, recognize who has the responsibility, and give those individuals and entities the make sure that they understand that they need to comply.
You also indicated the SDRs are going to play a role in this. Are you going to hold the SDRs responsible for reporting compliance of the entity, or is it the fault of the entity if they don't comply?
So in the event we get to talking about failures, absolute failures by the SDR, I think that's part of it. That would be a conversation later. I think in the first instance, the discussions that we've had with the SDRs relates to a lot of the challenges that you've heard so far this morning, sort of the consistency and the accuracy of the reporting. There's been a number of conversations on a day-to-day level as instances have come up. If there have been errors in the reporting or systems have gone down, I want to step back and have a view sort of on a macro basis. What has happened over the last several months or the year? What's our trend with the SDRs sort of going forward? Are there issues that I need to be concerned about as a director within the program, or the questions that we have and the plans that we've already implemented? And I think the SDRs have been very good partners in terms of, in some instances, very proactive in self-reporting, and I want to continue that dialogue. So I'm not in a position to answer the question in a short form now to say whether or what steps need to be taken to fix the SDRs, or say that the SDRs need to be fixed. I think it's more focused on a dialogue and ensuring that we have a consistency of communication between us about expectations.
Gary?
Okay. Gary Barnett, DSIO. DSIO regularly participates in the swap data harmonization meetings. We're working with our colleagues in ODT, OCE, DMO, and DCR to ensure that swap data provided by swap dealers to SDRs will meet the needs of DSIO. We're also working to develop methods for integrating swap data, SDR data, into our swap dealer and MSP compliance program to test for compliance with swap dealer reporting requirements, into our CPO and CTA program to test the accuracy of funds reporting of swaps exposures, and into our exam program as part of our examination of swap dealers and FCMs and other intermediaries to examine for compliance with our regulations. For instance, focusing on SDR data and swap dealers, seeking to ensure that swap dealers are demonstrating compliance with CEA and CFTC regulations generally, but including more specifically things like ensuring that a market participant doesn't act as an SD or MSP unless they're registered as such, ensuring that SDs or MSPs maintain full, complete, and systematic records of swap activities, ensuring that swap dealers and MSP swap transactions and pricing data are available to the public in real time, and eventually confirming that swap dealer and MSP compliance with capital and margin requirements is occurring. With those important aims so dependent on good information, good data, and good technology, we're very interested and connected to the group, the SDR and other swaps data reporting efforts, and beyond to the other issues in our space. Everything you've heard basically applies to us in our efforts. But in addition, we've been asked to play cleanup batter and to discuss some of our other data and technology needs. We have a different orientation. We want to talk to you for a few minutes about the data and technology needs we have in the pursuit of our mission and the use of those technologies. So, for instance, in addition to our SDR efforts, we're also involved in the swap dealer registration process, which entails the submission by swap dealers and our review of mountains of policies and procedures, which are provided under the Commission's Rule 310 to demonstrate compliance with 4S or the swap dealer requirements under Title VII. Without our technology, it'd be a nearly impossible task. And in the process of receiving and reviewing these large volumes of submissions, we use two basic systems: Concordance, which is actually an electronic discovery management software that allows us to gather, manipulate, and search the data, but also Case Map software that allows the management of facts and issues that arise. The funds space is another area that DSIO covers, for which we foresee heavy reliance on technology. In terms of the technology focus in that space, disclosure documents are filed by CPOs and CTAs with NFA. We have access to them through Fax 2000, which is the program through which we access NFA's database. They're uploaded in Word. We can download to our PCs. We also have access to NFA's review documents. But we can't have policy, scope review, and issue spotting driven by NFA. We need to develop our own systems, our own issues list, and criteria points for which each of the relevant points, topics, sort of like an audit module, but for reviewers of legal documents. So we have that to do as well. In addition, forms PQR and PR are uploaded to our servers by NFA as raw data, and we're working with ODT on developing a database for it. The SDR reporting data is gives us, very granular swap information, but when conjoined with the reporting in a sense will put together the swap information, but we can test whether that information, to some extent we can test the accuracy of that by looking to the SDR data. We'll eventually be able to do that. As the division that has compliance and exam oversight of intermediaries, in particular FCMs and swap dealers, our heavy technology needs relate to reporting and examination of those entities. And so in that regard, we use two primary types of software: RSR, which is a database for maintaining firm information, and Teammate, which is audit software, basically electronic working papers for accountants or auditors. RSR is a database that intermediaries send info into via Windjammer. So if they're sending us financial reports, risk reports, notices, or the like, they can scan it, attach it as a PDF, and send it. It goes straight into a file for that submitting dealer or intermediary. Teammate, as mentioned, is auditing software. Once set up properly to cover our standardized audit programs, this software facilitates the reviews of firms by requiring standardized minimum steps and obtaining required documentation, and collects it in a way that helps make the supervisory review process more efficient. In terms of our strategy in using these two key tools as part of our exam oversight and examination, RSR is one-stop shopping for all information on a firm. The examiner can go in, quickly access all the financial and regulatory information about the intermediary, and others across the Commission can access it too. It's very important for, given the fact that we lack staffing, the staffing we need, it enhances our efficiencies and helps us fill the gap of examiners. But obviously, it's a hurdle, a burden, but the RSR is a definite help. We use RSR to perform the initial analysis of firm filings. For instance, filings that indicate under-seg or under-secured situations or less than early warning capital requirements will trigger a red flag that comes to staff. And we've developed some red flags to help in that regard. And we use that data to help develop our watch list. Also, as part of our strategy is the hardware. Obviously, on-site visits are an important part of what we do, so laptops and remote system access is very important to us to support the software. Those are in need of upgrade, but we're in the process of doing that, so we're grateful for that. In terms of strategy, we've had some successes. We've upgraded Teammate to a current version. We've developed some financial analytics for the financial data we receive from FCMs, including some trend analysis on a institution-by-institution basis. But we're looking to try to develop more of an industry-wide trend view so that we can find outliers. In terms of our technology path forward, we need to gain a handle on the SDR data for the methods, for the reasons expressed at the beginning of the talk. But in addition, in terms of the tools we're using in terms of examination and oversight, RSR, we need to continue to work with ODT to assess effectiveness of the database. Is there a more efficient method? It's very difficult. It's very useful, but it's very difficult to upgrade and revise, and given the changes that are going on, a lot of changes are needed. Also, we need to develop the industry-wide dashboard that I mentioned before. We need to continue to evaluate Teammate and update hardware and remote access capabilities, and then we also need to integrate the swap dealer data into RSR. So that's a little bit of an overview of what we're doing from the technology and data perspectives, in addition to our participation in the SDR harmonization efforts. Thank you.
Gary, are you using SDR data at all right now?
We're not. We're just at the very beginning of that.
Are you responsible having the swap dealer filings? This looks like compliance, right?
This
Are they
is-
filing the forms? And I understand we have, what it was, 180,000 pages of SDR filings, and this will all go into that separate database?
It'll, if I understand your
This
question.
RSR database?
It'll go into RSR,
Okay.
correct.
So are you going to use SDR data to develop risk reports and bilateral systemic relationships, things like AIG, London Whale, or are you going to use this separate RSR platform?
Eventually, we would use it to test our database and then probably manipulate it in some other ways. So the SDR reporting gives us granular information, but looking for trends and things of that sort and funny patterns, we haven't gotten our hands around that yet. We would think of testing that against the SDR data, but you know, if John tells me that we can do something directly from the SDR data or with an additional tool that straps on, that would be, but we're not at that point yet.
So would you have the responsibility for evaluating and kind of identifying risk in the OTC data? Isn't that for an for a swap dealer?
On an intermediary basis, we would.
A swap dealer.
Yes.
Right? So, but you're not using the SDR data currently?
Not yet.
All right. Do you have a timetable when you're going to be mining that data for risk, bilateral systemic risk in the OTC market?
No. No. I mean, I know that it's an imperative. We're a member of the committee. We're working on it, but I don't have a fixed timetable to give you for that yet.
In terms of priorities, where does it fall?
We're still in the registration process with the swap dealers. We're still reviewing their 4S submissions and their, you know, so we need to get through that, and we need to continue to coordinate with John, figure out, you know, what tools are available to us. We are working on something similar to that in the fund space, but we have not yet turned to the swap dealer space. At this point, we're just looking to use the information to help us when we look to see their compliance with our record-keeping rules and things of that sort.
Well, thank you very much to the panel for your thoughts, your concerns, the issues you've identified. I think you've given us a pretty good but high-level oversight of the challenges we have, and obviously harmonization was a theme that everybody touched on. I'd like to open it up to the TAC members' thoughts, concerns, observations, questions, further questions. There's dozens of questions I'd like to ask, but I'd really like to get your thoughts on how we tackle harmonization. For example, nobody's touched on a UPI. What would a UPI, this universal product identifier, would that enhance things? Are there things in the industry that would be benefit our efforts in terms of accelerating our standardization process? I want to talk a little bit about international. Wednesday we have SDRs going live in Europe. Obligation is for anybody over there to report both to the U.S. SDR and to European SDRs. Where do we stand on recognizing, assimilating, harmonizing that data? There's obviously a little more discussion I think we could have on enforcement, risk management analytics. Obviously, I think we have clearly a long way to go there. So I'd open it up to the floor, and if there are no questions, I got about 10. But I don't want to have to ask them because it's really your thoughts and observations to be useful here.
So, I just wanted to make a comment about, the tools that are available, perhaps to the end users. Currently, if I were to just look at our trades, they're being reported to 3 different SDRs, and we're not given any tools where we could receive the information regarding our trades. And one advantage for that would be that you'd be able to find any discrepancy in data and, perhaps lead to some form of harmonization without like the CFTC being, the first body that identifies an issue. This is something we've been asking for from day one. And we have yet to see this come to fruition. On your question on international for Wednesday, the requirements for reporting from a buy-side perspective, it's quite different. Just because the reporting party or the responsibility for one side of the trade does reside on the buy side, historically we've been dependent on the sell side or swap dealers to do most of our reporting. So we, expect in the coming weeks or months that process to be a little bit bumpy. The market has to get used to a two-side reporting structure.
Maybe I can ask Vince to address this issue. There's been, we've heard this from the end users quite a bit on how do end users validate what's been sent to SDRs? How do they know? There's a good article in Risk last week that appeared in our clips. You probably saw it. End users really addressing the issue of where's my data and what if it was misreported? What do I do about it? This obviously touches on some of your enforcement thoughts. What do you recommend for end users?
Let me consult with my experts here behind me in 2 seconds.
Good morning, Commissioner Amalia. Good morning, Commissioner Amalia and TAC. Some of you already know me. I'm Lori Gusso with the Division of Market Oversight. And Vince asked me to take this question. Could you rephrase it, please? Could you repeat it, please? I am so sorry. Can you hear me now?
From an end user perspective, one of the beneficial tools would be if the SDRs provide us with the ability to reconcile the information that's being reported on our behalf. Currently, like if we were just to limit ourselves to, cleared swaps or swaps in general, there are 3 SDRs where we're reporting our data, but there's like zero insight into what's being reported on our behalf.
Right. So the SDR rules require that they reach out to the counterparties to confirm the accuracy of the data. The methodology that the SDR chooses to do so, that's incumbent upon the SDR to develop that technology. And the services they provide to their users is also a business decision of the SDRs, and the rules aren't prescriptive with respect to the services they have to offer. Except that they have to confirm the accuracy of the data and make the data available to the counterparties to ensure accurate data and provide for error and omission corrections, which of course through the rules indicates that comes through the reporting counterparty. So, that might be a conversation you might want to have with your independent SDR or SDRs.
Yeah, we've had discussions with them, and I'd just like to make a comment because you mentioned it's their business decision, but this is a regulatory requirement, and there's been a lot of emphasis throughout this process by the CFTC, which we believe in on straight-through processing and timely delivery of information. So far, what we've seen, if we want to receive the information, it would be a very manual process and almost impossible for us to reconcile.
And which regulatory requirement to which are you referring?
For the reporting, for mandatory trading, and then eventually, the information of that trade being reported to an SDR.
Right, and so that there's a reporting counterparty chosen in the interaction, and then that reporting counterparty submits the data to the SDR. Then the SDR reaches out to the counterparties to confirm the accuracy of the data. And again, that's the SDR's decision on how to implement or comply with that regulation. And so each SDR has different methodology in which they've developed to do so. So again, if you have an issue with respect to that, you may want to talk to your specific SDR. And of course, Division Market Oversight is always, happy to discuss this with participants. And many of you know that we do spend a lot of time on the phone discussing issues. And again, it may be something that would be appropriate, to comment with respect to the Interdivisional Data Working Group.
Yeah, I'm just curious to know, a lot has been mentioned about harmonization, which I think is great, and it's produced, as the panel stated, a lot of good results. But that's been focused primarily on the output of information, and I'm just curious to know The output obviously is dependent upon the input that's coming into the SDRs. I'm curious to know if there's any forum that exists that allows consistency of approach back to the other market participants on a way to ensure that that consistency is coming into the 3 SDRs that exist today, or whether the harmonization effort is just focused on the output between the CFTC and the SDRs.
That's a great question. I mean, Rogers has used the SDR effort he's been quarterbacking to harmonize what comes from the SDRs to the Commission. I know a lot of end users are worried about standards of harmonization going into the SDRs. We've relied on the SDRs to be our Rosetta Stone, if you will, to harmonize this data, but some of this issue, and maybe this is what we can address as part of our working group to fix the fields, right? We had our appendix in our SDR Part 45 reporting that said, fill it out this way. And if there's any uncertainty about how you fill that out or enough of the fields, maybe we should address that. And I think maybe that's going to be a question that the working group and then the public comment will consider. I mean, what are you considering to help end users conform?
I think that's right. That is one of the areas that we are considering. You talked about the appendix to Part 45. So we see that as part of the process. Sort of the information as it gets to the SDR. It isn't just the SDR being reportable information to us. It's the utilization of the information that's coming into the SDR. So, that is a place that we do want to cover. So I appreciate that comment.
I know there's everybody talked about harmonization, but I don't know that harmonization means the same thing for every division. And is it harmonization from the 3 SDRs that have different data architecture, and therefore it's a challenge for us to download it from them and arrange it appropriately, or is it the quality of the material being reported? Can anybody reflect on where harmonization must occur to make it better for us?
So I hear it right as all of the above in terms of the types of the manner of information or the types of information that's reported. Just sort of some simple questions about the identification of a particular interest rate swap that is reporting in different fields, and so people are sort of capturing what is effectively the same swap in different ways, which makes it a challenge for us to handle that information. And so we say harmonization. I do think we are looking not only to say the standardization of the fields, we're also looking at what are the priorities with respect to each of the divisions, and then taking those priorities across the Commission and say, well, what is of these top 3 for each division, what is the top 3 for the Commission? And so we want to cover as much ground as we can, and I know I'm being very, very high level, but we're not looking to kick things out currently. We're trying to bring stuff in and try and get it ranked and be responsive.
Well, Wally, you had your card up.
Hi, thanks for the presentation. The whole issue of complete uniform data, it strikes me that maybe the original rules on SDR should have been much more aggressive to create a tremendous amount of leverage from the Commission from the get-go, as some of us had suggested. But that's water under the bridge, and that's not my question. The question I have is, it's especially with Ananda and Dan having talked a bit about uses of the data beyond just strictly compliance with a rule that exists, but more of a broader understanding of what's going on in the marketplace. My aspiration for this data is so that the Commission and staff will have a comprehensive understanding of the market and what's going on beyond just what's an existing rule. And the way this is set up is the divisions are talking about their particular needs. I'm wondering, is anybody talking about the overall needs of the Commission to understand the marketplace in an integrated and comprehensive way? And what are the data needs so that you can get not only the data that you need, but how you might be able to manipulate that data to have a more comprehensive understanding of what's going on in the markets?
I think that's the whole objective of this interdivisional working group. If you think about it, it should be a wish list, right? All the divisions. This is what I want. This is what I want to look at, and then you vet it with the Commission and then you go off a comment and say, this is what we need. Now, with all due respect to the industry, you can suggest things to us, but I submit that the divisions are sometimes in the best place to know what it is we want, right? So it seems to me that it is information that we need to do our jobs, right? Market surveillance is a particular function, risk is a particular function, and then trying to figure out whether people are clearing is something else. And then the other issue is, all right, what do we want? How do we get there? Meaning, what template do we have? Right? And this is where our, ODT colleagues can say, this is how you do. How do you send it? FixML, whatever protocol people use, should be one. Choice is nice when most times, but when it comes to something like this, I don't think choice is good, right? Tell people this is how you do it, this is the way you do it, and to go to Sperna's issue, anybody who has a stake in the data should be able to view the data, right? So I don't understand why you're saying you should have what, read-only access to your data? Is that what you want?
Read only, or just give us the information.
Right.
Like I'm not like we can reconcile it among the 3 SDRs.
Right.
Not sure if everyone can do that, but we're happy to
Right.
do that as a first step.
Right. So, and the other thing that we don't have is we don't have the ability to look at the risk posed by unclear transactions. No clue, right? You got line items. It's nice, but it doesn't tell you at the end of the day what the exposure of, say, top 10 banks are to each other, right? Now, they should know. I'm assuming they will know, but we don't know, right? Because all we have are line items. We don't, unlike the cleared space, we don't have position information. So that's a big challenge for us.
And I think what you said is exactly right. You made a good point and a very good question. I think it's something we'd like to do in the future, the piecing together of the market, of understanding how everything fits as a whole and how things influence each other. And the framework or the foundation of all of that is the data. And combining the good quality data with people's knowledge and experience in the markets and the tools we can build will get us there. It's just answering that really complicated question is something we're not nearly in the place to do at the moment if you consider all the data issues we're having.
Irene?
Hi, thank you. I actually am very impressed with the market reporting tool and somebody who deals with that on a daily basis. I wonder, are there any plans to extend the history of the data that's reported to the public? Because I noticed right now only 5 weeks are reported, I believe. And I understand you're trying to increase the granularity over time. Thank you.
Sorry, it's my mistake. We do have, I should have pointed it out, there's an archive section. So if you look at the weekly swaps report, on the columns to the left, there is a link to the archive section. And this is a query which came from one of the market participants. Can you send it in, can we download it in an Excel format? So a weekly swaps report can be downloaded in Excel also. Somebody asked for CSV. I said, give us some more money. We'll give you CSV in any other format you want. But right now we get it on HTML and on Excel. So, and you can get all the archive data also. So.
Thank you.
Sure, I have more of a comment than a question, and I think it relates to what Dan was saying, and I wanted to commend the staff that it sounds like you're taking a very careful approach to analyzing the granular data that you need for your role, and I just wanted to say thank you as an industry participant. We have to deal all the time with kind of the spurious conclusions that come out of, I'd say publication of other people's analysis of that granular data, and sometimes it's published, in nanoseconds, quicker than we make trades. But I just want to say thank you for what you said. It sounds like you're very carefully looking at that granular data.
Brian? We'll just go down the row after that.
Thank you. I just wanted to compliment the panel for their presentations and would ask us all, though, to reflect back. It was just really a few short months ago as these requirements kicked into effect, and the adoption of a swap data reporting regime was a monumental effort on the part of the entire industry. And I think what you've presented today shows that while there's still some challenges, it's come a long way in a relatively short period of time. And I only ask that we continue to try to take a pragmatic approach as we continue to evolve and further develop the progress that's been made to date. There were some comments, though, that were made that I did want to clarify with all of this that has been placed on the industry and the Commission itself. At the end of the day, I can assure you from the CME's perspective, we're deeply committed to its swap data reporting offering and to providing the Commission with the capabilities and the facilities that it needs for the purpose of effectively monitoring systemic risk. There are, a number of areas I think that were raised today that seem to point itself back to maybe a missing link, which is a missing product system, and that's been, I think, an ongoing source of consideration on both the part of the commission staff, and there seemed to have been an intensive focus on that for a period of time, but now that seems to have kind of lapsed. So I think that if we could possibly come back to getting to a unified product system, that might help clear up a number of issues that many of us are dealing with. There was also some comments with respect to the missing of data or inability to link up certain data components. And I think it was Ananda had mentioned the linkage of the alpha portion of transactions to the beta and the gamma. First of all of the data on cleared transactions resides in the clearinghouse. So we have all of the data in the clearinghouse. And when you start referencing the connectivity between the alpha portion of these transactions to the beta and gamma, I know our SDR shows that linkage between those various components. With respect to the gaps associated with the terminations of the alpha, I thought I had heard earlier in one of the reports, we've been sending that information since I believe it was December of last year. So my point is there is a lot of progress that's being made as we continue to evolve together as an industry. I can't implore the efforts enough on harmonization and what we've been trying to do together, working together as we learn a bit more about the progress that is made to continue our focus and emphasis on harmonization, because again, I think that helps all of us involved in this very important program to be even more effective as we go along in producing and providing the information that's needed. When we get to the issue of standardization of data, I would also ask that we give some consideration to standardization at what point, and how do we help the commission teams themselves to get to the point where they need to be in the context of the data as it's sent back into the systems and brought to the commission for its review. And so, I would just suggest that emphasis, be more so on the back end of the SDRs being able to submit that information in a very accurate and standardized format. That might be an area for us to focus more heavily on.
I'd just like to focus my comments on the harmonization that's been discussed, and the fact that we're talking about harmonization this year as opposed to data gathering that we were talking about last year, demonstrates the progress that we've made in actually gathering the data. But what I really would like to suggest is possibly rather than work on harmonization, which if you think about it from the life cycle of the data. You're really dealing with the issues at the back end, at the end of the life cycle of the data. I'd like to suggest that possibly we start thinking about rectifying and fixing the data, making sure it's correct as it comes into the system at the beginning of the life cycle of the data. And because no matter how much you harmonize data, you iterate around it, you're constantly working it, you get closer to the right answer, but it'll never really be perfect unless it's perfect when it goes into the various systems. And I know there's been a concern about not being too prescriptive, but maybe at this stage of the maturity level of the industry, there's a recognition that a little bit prescription, or maybe a lot of prescription, goes a long way to saving the industry a lot of money overall. And hearing the conversation around the global groups that are in progress, I mean, I think we have an opportunity now to learn from what we've done over the course of the past year and saying, if we had to do it all over again, can we inject some standards earlier in the process? It would deal with some of the issues we talked about, that Superna has been talking about, and also all the costs around this. And if we were to think about doing that, I mean, the way I typically do it is do an analysis all the way at the back end, see how the data is going to be used, and say, okay, for me to be able to use this data in the most efficient way possible, how would I deal?
Doing some data. This is the onus on the submitter, second, third, or fourth in that chain. So by systematically, I think it's hard to say that there's any systematic approach to do that based on what we all presented about the tools that are the staff that we have to work with and the data as it is. I think if you were to send a confirm to a client of yours, you would make sure that it was right before you sent it. You wouldn't really want the client to tell you that it was wrong. I think the same methodology or attention to detail could be applied in the things sent to us, so we're not the first line of defense to say, by the way, this doesn't make any sense.
I agree with you, and I'm not suggesting that the last one, but it's just the fact that you have hundreds, if not thousands, of reporting participants reporting according to different methodology. In my view, the first line of defense should be the SDR. And with the protocol that are being used, there is a way to validate the data using the Port 45 rule that you have developed alongside with the different protocols that they're using. I'm familiar with FPML, and FPML schema validation plus rule validations would go a long way with a stricter validation logic to ensure better data quality. The second comment that I have, I was interested by the discussion about notional computation for commodity equity swaps and those type of things, is what I would suggest, and I'm sure that hopeful that you do that already, is compare notes and compare methodology with existing agency in the US and outside of the US in terms of the way to compute the notional, because I think there is no right or wrong for those type of products, and what you do not want to do is to have a methodology that would not be comparable with the one already used, because people already report notionals in currencies with other agencies. That would facilitate their work down the road.
Yeah, that's a useful comment, I guess. And we also face a similar situation for which you have a solution in the futures world. So there are a huge amount of options activity, and we need to compute the notional terms. So we have a structure in place to do that, but it's something that we're working on, as you suggested. Thanks.
From my perspective is this is kind of less a rule problem as it is a data manufacturing, understanding of the data manufacturing process problem that the industry has to go through. So the current model that we describe of fragmentation, lots of participants, lots of complex instruments, lots of transformation processes, lots of relationships, is going to always be challenged if what you're trying to do is harmonize just structured data against meaning. So I think it was Ananda who described the problem correctly. This is about understanding relationships in the context of the structure of these instruments. And there is a better way, I think, that we have to start thinking about this problem. And Scott, I think you talked about a true Rosetta Stone, and the Rosetta Stone that we're looking at not only aligns data, but it has to align meaning, and it has to be comparable, and it has to include the relationship processes that exist. And currently, the way we're doing harmonization ignores that side of the problem, and we have to be able to model those relationships. And it is possible to do that, and it's a different way of approaching it. But that, I think, is the only way you're going to solve this problem.
Yeah, when we go back to when the Committee on Data Standardization was meeting, the TAC and the CFTC accepted a number of principles around data reporting, and there were three of them that were pretty important that it doesn't, that I was involved with, but there's others as well, and I'm asking a general question as to whether the principles that were accepted are actually being followed in the work that's being done afterwards. In other words, are people going back and reviewing? And I'll give the example. One of the things we said was that the SDR was responsible to report to the Commission in whatever format the Commission required, but that the SDR was going to set its own rules to the street for how it was going to collect the data. And part of the reason that was done was because even various firms couldn't agree on what format they wanted to report the data in. And so that was supposedly being left open to the SDRs to allow them to provide better service to their customers. And then the last piece was that the data that was reported to an SDR was supposed to be freely available for editing and correction to any party to the swap transaction. And freely available for editing and correction, it was envisioned that there would actually be APIs that people could get to, which it sounds like are not there. So I'm sort of asking the staff members here, to what extent are you going back when you look at these data problems and saying, we adopted these principles for data gathering? Are we actually following them?
So I can't speak to the second one, but I can certainly speak to the first one. And the answer to the first one is absolutely yes. We are looking at the data from the perspective of how the Commission would gain access to it. I won't necessarily say receive it, because there are really two elements to that. There is the data that is actually at the SDR in a portal that the Commission can get access to, and then there's the data that would flow back to the Commission so that it could commingle with other data, including futures data and that sort of thing. Regardless of what the method is, we want the data to look the same and be, harmonized across the different SDRs. That means that people have to have a common understanding for a particular element and how it's used, have common sets of values, and all sorts of other different things around the data. But in terms of the first item, regardless of whether it is at the SDR or being sent to the Commission, we will determine the form and manner of the data flowing to us, but we are not talking about the manner in which the data is flowing into the SDR. So, perhaps somebody else can speak to this.
No, I'm just sort of want to follow the point. I see, if there's an industry standard or an industry practice about how entities are executing transactions, and then I'm then subject to the vagaries of a particular SDR that these transactions are reported to, who wants to recast it or rename it in some way, I would view that as problematic. I mean, I think our staff here would be looking at sort of an apples to apples review of what's happening on the street, and would be concerned that harmonization or the application of a naming convention by SDR gives a potential for a lack of consistency and makes it more confusing.
Yeah, I was specifically alluding to there was a bit of a knockdown, drag-out fight about whether people should have FPML or fixed reporting. And essentially it was decided to leave that up. You could have the same data in either format, but depending on where the swap was executed, there was a marked preference for one format or the other.
Sure, I'll just add in. I think that what you're asking and the way that I answered it, I think, are in alignment. We are, when we get to the point where we're receiving data, just like we do with Part 20 data, we will decide the particular schema that is used because we've heard very similar conversations. And in the case of Part 20, we actually support, since it's data that we're ingesting here on a regular basis, both FixML and FPML because we can. We'll be focusing on those kinds of questions down the line as it relates to data flowing back here, but we're not dictating the actual message structure as it flows into the SDR. And each one of them, we know, does it differently for particular reasons of their own. At the end of the day, we need to make use of the data regardless of the mechanism that the messages or the method in which the methods or messages flow in. And that's what we're focusing on. So to get to that point where we can look at things in like terms across the SDRs is really more of that content and semantic, analysis that we would do, more so than the particular message types that would flow into the SDRs.
If I could just make a point, there's a technology issue and then there's a content issue. So as long as the technology does not interfere with the content of the information that we are getting for our regulatory purposes, then you can say it shouldn't matter, right? But I'm not sure, and I'll defer to my colleague John, I'm not sure whether that's the case. If the manner in which the information is being sent, if there's one better way than another, why shouldn't we choose the better way? And if it means, we prescribe something, maybe that's the way we do it. Because, again, I got to stress, at the end of the day, I think a critical function of reporting is so that we can do our jobs. And we cannot do our jobs, then there's something's going wrong.
Yeah, I guess, if I may.
Yep.
I would liken it to what Dan Buxa said a moment ago, thinking of us. When I look at the harmonization activity that we're talking about, I look at the people that are sitting next to me as basically customers. They're the users of the data, and they might have particular purposes. So we are looking to make sure that the data, the content itself, satisfies those purposes. And in so much as it is necessary to harmonize that content so that they can get the business value out of it, that's what we're going to do. And that's where, in harmonization, we've had lots of conversations with the SDRs about what this means to us and the value that it provides to the commission. And if we need to be prescriptive in that regard, we have been.
We're getting way over time, but I'm going to hit Carl, Chuck, and Bob for kind of last observations. So keep it tight.
Okay, thank you. The taxonomy and product identifiers have been mentioned a couple of times during the presentation, so I kind of wanted to pick up on that. So when the ISA taxonomy was developed, and that's taxonomy that is used for most of the reporting, we kind of deliberately kept it fairly high level. And I think what's needed in particular in something like taxonomy is really a dialogue with the CFTC, because as mentioned a couple of times about more detail, but from an industry perspective, I think there is need for a better understanding of where do you want the detail and what is the detail that you want. So I think this is certainly an area where more input is required. My second point on the taxonomy is that we see the whole taxonomy discussion as a discussion that should take place on an international level, meaning ideally you have one taxonomy not just for CFTC reporting, but for global reporting. And so my point is we are having discussions with other regulators, but all regulators have kind of their own requirements. And so my question to the panel is, in taxonomy, but also in other areas, if you could give a little bit more detail about what the plans are. And I realize this is kind of almost the next step after harmonization of the data you receive here, but what are some of the plans to work on harmonization on taxonomy and other levels with other regulators internationally?
So I can tell you that it is very much our interest to coordinate both here in the U.S. and internationally, and we've been doing some of those things already. We are significantly constrained by resources, to be sure, but we have heeded the advice from the SDRs that have actually come out and said to us, please don't invent your own taxonomy and develop a system for the CFTC, only to then have us have to do something differently for other jurisdictions. And so we are coordinating where we can with agencies like OFR. We're also coordinating internationally with groups like ESMA on the development of a taxonomy, and we'll plan to continue to do so. And when such time as there is an international group that focuses on UPI, similar to what is already going on with LEI, we would hope that the work that we are doing would fit within that, and so that there would be a global UPI initiative and outcome.
Chuck?
Thanks. A few comments, I suppose. One, I would say the interdivisional working group, I think, as an SDR, we felt like in the last few months, that group is, you guys are, the coordination and the communication going on that you're doing, I think, collectively with the SDRs and individually is helping us, the industry, work through these problems. It's just going to be a slog to work through. I think Dan made an important point in his presentation. The large trader reporting system for futures took tens of years to get to the point where it is, and I would argue it's not near as complicated in terms of the problem that it solves, where much more fragmented OTC swaps market, much less standard instruments, and on top of it, rules that require real-time reporting and movement of data around in real time between multiple entities. I mean, it is a complicated thing. So I think some of this is to be expected, and I think we just have to work through it as an industry, and we'll get there. Second point I would make is I think it's important to talk about uncleared and uncleared swaps separately. I agree wholeheartedly with Brian in that for cleared swaps, that data is in the clearinghouse. There's no under or over reporting. There's margin calls on that data every day, so it has to be 100% correct. The fact that there is a trade, it exists, there's a position, who's the buyer and who's the seller. So it should not be rocket science, as Ananda alluded to, for those cleared trades to get into an SDR with whatever USI audit trail that we need and whatever alpha trade termination messages being received and processed. So that's incumbent upon, I think, the three SDRs and the working group to make that happen as quickly as possible. From an uncleared swap standpoint, for the commodity asset class, ICE operates one of the larger, maybe the largest, I don't know, commodity swap data repository, primarily uncleared swaps in the asset class that potentially has the most variation in data. And I can tell you there it is going to ultimately be incumbent upon the SDRs, hopefully on the back of some standard UPIs or some other type of industry embrace of taxonomy, to enforce the requirement that quality data get in the SDR. We've taken our knocks with our customers, sending us data that we've rejected because it was improperly formatted, or it was incomplete, or it didn't meet the standard field definitions. They have to go back and fix it and send it to us again. But we've been fairly strict about that. We've been very strict about that, because if garbage in is garbage out. And so I think on the uncleared swap space, it's important that the SDRs have a common approach in that regard. The last point I would say is, of course, end users need access to the SDR to be able to see the trades that they are parties to that are there, correct, edit any information that may be wrong. I think we're kind of crawling before we walk and run in that regard. I mean, I suspect, I know ICE does, I'm sure I would think any of the SDRs have the ability for users to log into those systems and see those trades, probably export data. Are we at the point of APIs? No, I don't think we are. For somebody certainly as sophisticated as BlackRock, I'm sure we'll get there. No question they're necessary. There's no reason not to have them. But I think it's early days in that regard. And as we operate a couple of SDRs, and I can tell you, even though making it available for end users to access that data and review it. Very few avail themselves of that at this stage. But again, I think it's early days. That's it.
Yeah, I just have a quick comment and then an ask, and the comment is similar to what other people said, that in a little more than a year to be able to get up and functioning what this industry has been able to get up with a situation where you have immensely complex data and as a result immensely complex systems really is quite a good place to be when you step back at a high level and look at what's been accomplished. That's not to minimize at all the issues that we have going forward. The ask is around the cross-divisional working group, which I think is a tremendous step forward. The ask that I would have is, as we have each division head, they all have different seats, different requirements, things that they want to see. I think it would help to have things approached in a very formal way and prioritize the work that you'd like the industry to focus on. We can't solve everything all at once, so to have a sense of what's most important to the CFTC to move forward, I think would be very important. As Dan said, this is an iterative process. We'll work through those things in the priority order that gets set. But I think having that working group be formal and come up with priorities and collaborate very actively with the practitioners of the data across the market participants, I think is also very important.
I completely agree with that, especially when it comes to our own budgeting, because if we can't figure out what their priorities are, it's tough to spend the money based on their priorities, which I think will dictate our investment. Any final comments from our division directors? Greatly appreciate your thoughtfulness, your directness, and willingness to answer all these questions. So thank you very much. We obviously look forward to